Hello, everybody. Today I had the pleasure of talking with Marty Haulena, a brilliant and seasoned marine veterinarian at the Vancouver Aquarium. Marty and the teams he works with have helped make huge innovations in the anesthetic protocols used to sedate animals in the field for marine rescue. We talked about the current state of the marine world, the many threats facing these animals and our oceans, and of course had a brilliant time trying to think of ways we can solve these problems and make use of modern technologies. I had a fantastic time, and I hope I will have a chance to talk with him again soon. If after the podcast you would like to learn more about Marty and the amazing work they're doing over in Vancouver, or would like to connect and support, we included information in the show notes in the description for how you can do so. Also, as always, if you're enjoying this thing, subscribe on YouTube, review us with 5 stars on Google or Apple Podcasts, and support us on Patreon. And to connect with us on Instagram or Twitter, our @handle is Blogo Podcast. Now, without further ado, Marty Haulena. Yeah, let's dive in if you're ready. Do you want to just to kind of give a little background on yourself and could you walk us through kind of your progression, how you ended up where you were, your schooling, how long you've been with Vancouver, as far back as you want to go.
Sure. So let's see where to begin. I guess at the end is probably the best way to start. So I'm the head veterinarian director of animal health at Vancouver Aquarium and also Vancouver Aquarium's Marine Mammal Rescue Center. And I've been in Vancouver for about 14 years now. Before that, I was in Sausalito at the Marine Mammal Center as head veterinarian there for about 9 years. And let's see, so I'm a veterinarian, which means going to veterinary school. If you do want to do this sort of thing, which is kind of specialized in aquatic animal health issues, then you need to do a little bit more after veterinary school. So I also have a master's in pathobiology after vet school, clinical internship, and I'm boarded as a specialist by the American College of Zoological Medicine with a subspecialty in aquatic animal medicine. So that takes a little bit of time by the time you're done all that, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Is that the route someone needs to go if they want to be a veterinarian focusing on like marine animals? There's no you have to, I guess, specialize in the marine part after completing the base veterinary school?
That's absolutely right. So just like in human medicine, you need to be a fully licensed doctor or fully licensed veterinarian, and then you start your road to specialization, which could be, a minimum of 2 years up to 10 years for sure. And absolutely. And the weird part with veterinary medicine is, especially my specialty, is we have a specialty based on the species that you treat, not just your technique that you use as like a surgeon or internal medicine person or radiologist. We have those specialties as well, but my own specialty is based on the species I treat.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, I didn't even think about that part until you just said that I guess, for our human side, it's based on technique, but obviously there's such a variety of animals that be specified by the type of animal. So which ones are your specialty?
I'm most experienced with marine mammals, particularly pinnipeds, so seals and sea lions. But I deal with everything from sea stars to beluga whales.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was watching when I looked you up to kind of just learn more about you. There's so many awesome videos of all the animals you've helped. Going even further back, I guess. What
just frozen their story.
Oh, better now?
Yep, you're there.
Oh, okay, perfect. Going even a little further back, when do you have like a particular memory of, maybe it might have even been like a sad one, but when you realized, I guess, you wanted to like help animals and like treat animals more than just research them? Like, was there something that like triggered that, or do you remember?
Yeah, for sure. I have a really, really great family and incredibly supportive parents. And so I kind of decided I wanted to do what I'm doing right now when I was probably about 6 or 7 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly, our grandmother, my grandmother lived with us, and because both parents worked, she kind of was the primary caretaker, and she was very connected to the outdoors and going outside. And I remember vividly a dead garter snake on one of our walks, and us placing flowers on the snake kind of stuff. And she just had this
Mhm.
sort of respect for things around her to a certain extent. She was afraid of snakes for sure. But then, I grew up in Ottawa, which is really quite the snow belt, in kind of eastern central Canada, and very much, one of those snow geese where we Canadians go down south when it gets when the weather gets crappy for a couple of weeks just to warm up again. And so my parents were not super well to do, but certainly could afford a vacation. But we drove, like a lot of Canadians did, to Florida. And along the way, they had the misfortune of having a son like me that, absolutely was adamant about stopping at every roadside zoo or bird show or aquarium or whatever. So it took us probably a little longer than most people to get to Florida,
Yeah.
especially when we got to the southern states where there were a lot of those kind of exhibits and stuff. But yeah, no, I definitely was inspired by a dolphin in a very small aquarium that I'm sure would not be able to exist by today's standards, but you were allowed to kind of feed and interact with this animal, and that was a very special moment to me. I was probably about 9 or 10 at that point. So yeah, it's been something I've wanted to do for a very long period of time.
That's really awesome. That's beautiful. Um, yeah, that's just so awesome. There's so few people you meet that really kind of saw what they wanted to do so early on and like followed it. Like for me, the only person I can really think of right away is my grandma. She like basically, my family's originally from Bulgaria. Most of them are still there.
Right.
But she basically always wanted to be a doctor. Like I don't know how early it went, but anybody that tells the stories of her from like the town we're from or her herself, like ever since she was like super tiny, and all she ever wanted to do was like help people and be a doctor. So all she did was like read up, became a doctor when she was like in her 20s, and then it's a pretty small town, so she was like one of the main doctors in kind of like that hospital. And she, even by retiring age, it kind of like there's so few people because like in the Balkan states, a lot of people were emigrating out. So a lot of the towns and cities were like shrinking. So around when she was supposed to retire, they actually like if she didn't want to leave in the first place, but if she would have like left, they wouldn't have been able to like run the hospital. So she stayed on like even longer. And then she has like now she has like little like clinics, things that she does, but she just something she was born to do. Like she's always known. She's like the most patient person. And
Right.
but yeah, probably similar to you. You just want to. It's beautiful knowing that you can help these people or these animals. Um, I wanted to
Yeah, no,
definitely.
it's been
Mhm.
sorry, it's been a great journey and certainly a long journey, but I don't regret any step of it. I think much like your grandmother, also much like your grandmother, I was actually born in the Czech Republic.
Oh, really?
Sort of
That's
getting back
awesome.
to
I
the
didn't know that either. Yeah,
Bulgaria. Yeah.
yeah, because yeah, I would like my even like me and my direct family. Like I was born over there and we came when I was 5 years old when I was younger. But that's awesome.
Hmm.
um, but yeah, in terms of I would love because I know even just from like the videos and like things I read like online, there's some things you've definitely like pushed forward or like pioneered that I'd love for you to kind of overview, like the kind of developments in like anesthesia and immobilization that you. I don't know if you like led that or was just like a big change in the fact that you could go kind of out on the field and help animals. If you could kind of go over how,
Sure.
I guess maybe the way it looked before those changes happen and what we can do nowadays, and the kind of the kind of ways we can help and the things you can do with that or have.
Yeah, for sure. And I absolutely need to just make clear that it was not just me by
Mhm.
any stretch of the imagination. It's a large, well, actually not that large, but there aren't that many people that do what I do. But certainly it was a very much a group effort, and a lot of different institutions and facilities kind of came together to try and make things better. So when I was in veterinary school, one of my mentors, Joe Gerasi, who was at the University of Guelph in Ontario, landlocked university, but happened to be um, one of the 2 or 3 top marine mammal veterinarians in the world. And he just settled in Guelph, and that's where he became a professor. And so he and Dr. David Saint-Aubin, who is also a huge mentor of mine, kind of realized that I was a bit interested. I probably made that very, very clear to them and was very annoying about it. But they took me under their wing and helped me out during veterinary school, and I worked in their lab and stuff. But I remember very, very clearly going, talking about anesthesia and surgery in animals and in marine mammals. And Joe was very clear. He went, Marty, you can't safely anesthetize a dolphin. You can't do surgery on a sea lion. The animals are just not conducive to that, the way they live, the way they breathe, the way their physiology works. And at that point in time, he was absolutely right. Things were not doing great. There is still a veterinarian by the name of Dr. Sam Ridgway, who's kind of the major pioneer in what we do, who was doing some work with the US Navy in the early 60s and was showing some success, but certainly that was not widespread by any stretch of the imagination, and that was about the only facility anywhere. So when I graduated and started doing my clinical internships, and then ended up at the Marine Mammal Center in California, certainly, that was and still is probably the world's largest marine mammal rescue center in terms of the numbers of animals that come there, and certainly a lot of animals really needed to be anesthetized. And they had been doing some anesthesia for sure. Dr. Lori Gage and Dr. Leslie Deeroff at the time had pushed the boundaries, but mortality rates were very high. And at the same time, when I got there, this was now about 1998, 97, we were presented with a number of animals that had big animals, big stellar sea lions, up to 1,000 kilos, that had, fisheries interaction injuries out in the wild, and that sort of stuff, entanglements, fish hooks, that sort of stuff really affects me. The injuries that are caused directly by human activity have a very particular kind of pull on my heartstrings. That's really, really something I really want to do something about. Give those guys a second chance. So I was very interested in a way to try and mobilize those animals, get to them, and help them out. We also had a situation up in northern Alaska where we have a very endangered population of stellar sea lions. And researchers there were trying to save them and develop ways to track them, take samples, figure out why their population was declining, but also figure out where they were foraging, where they were eating, and try and protect those areas. So they went out and started darting them with drugs that were being used at the time, and with the theory that what you wanted to do with a sea lion on a rock is immobilize them so quickly that they didn't have time to go into the water. So they used some potent agents and certainly darted them, and unfortunately had, what turns out to be about a 10, maybe 12% mortality rate from anesthesia, which was deemed unacceptable. The animals were falling asleep in puddles and dropping into the water and passing away. So their permits were pulled, and they're really stuck because they needed to help this population. The population is in rapid decline, and so they kind of came back to us at the Marine Mammal Rescue and the Marine Mammal Center in California and said, "Listen, we've got this problem. We really need to develop a way to safely anesthetize these animals. And you guys have all these animals that need to have anesthetics all the time. They're just coming in for all these sort of things. Can you help us out?" And we said, "Yeah, I mean, the synergy here is unbelievable. Let's do this." And so for the next probably 10 years, we went very heavy on a lot of different anesthetic research, trying different compounds, trying newer reversible agents, looking at how animals breathe under anesthetic, how to better support them, how to maintain body temperature better, what happens to them really when they're under anesthetic, and looking at very detailed kind of studies. And that was not just with us, but other folks as well, kind of all coming together. And then I moved to up here to Vancouver, and was here for a few years. And we had a very dear stellar sea lion male named Tag, who was just a giant animal, but he developed cancer in his mouth, and we needed a way to kind of safely immobilize him and treat him at very regular intervals and give him chemotherapy and some surgical approaches as well. So we looked at a few different compounds and tried a combination that Dr. Lucy Spellman had first tried at the National Zoo in Washington, D.C. And it really worked for him. We kind of tweaked it a little bit for him because he was so big, and that was really awesome. And then we He did eventually pass away, but the sort of work we did with him was very inspirational. Went back down to some researchers in Oregon that had a number of large sea lions that need to be anesthetized for some marking, and tried a few different combinations, including the one that worked with tag, and it worked really, really well. And all the researchers were quite impressed. So we rushed out and got those permits back, and then they allowed us to finally go out in the field. And so I remember this is now probably around 2012, 2010, maybe 2011, in Southeast Alaska. Permits are finally, this is now 15 years later or so, permits are now finally given back to us. And I take that first shot, and it works. The animal goes to sleep nicely. We're using a combination of 3 drugs. Most of them are two out of the 3 of them are reversible, so we can reverse the anesthetic at the end of the procedure. And they produce a very safe level of anesthetic. And the problem is that it takes a long time for the animals to fall asleep. About 12 minutes is peak effect with that drug combination. So that animal worked just well. So we went, okay, let's do this again. Tried the second shot, and that animal ran into the water. So I was like, holy crap, that's it. I've just ruined this whole thing. This population is going to die out. We can't help it anymore. They're going to pull our permits.
A lot of tension.
It was just devastating, right? The animal was just gone. And so researchers and I were like we're running around the rocks looking for this animal, hoping she'd come back and follow, and we just didn't. And it was kind of sunsetting, the evening kind of coming in. We're all boat based, so I had to get back to the boat. And so folks, I think it was myself and Brian Fadley and Tom Gillette, my main collaborators, left on rocks, and final skiff was coming to get us. So like, guys, you gotta get back. So we're like, okay. And so we're going, and I see this little kind of in the water, this yellow brown hump, and I went, that's her. That's her belly floating, and oh my God, we killed her. So I'm like, oh, necropsy and permits, and it's so devastating. So we pull up to her, and as we do so, she lifts her head and breathes. And so I go, what? And everyone's just going, what? And she kind of shakes it off a little bit and breathes again and kind of dives into the water. She's certainly drugged, and she moves away. And now this is probably an hour or an hour and 20, maybe an hour and a half after the initial, well, maybe even longer after the initial dart. And we're like, holy crap, they survive if they go in the water. And that was the single game changer in all of this, was figuring out that the combination of drugs that we use, if the animals get away from us, they're still going to likely survive because they actually float and breathe when they get back in the water. And we did a few more animals, and certainly 1 or 2 of them went back in the water. We followed them up on them, made sure they survived, reversed one of them in the water. And it was amazing. So from that, the lines in the Western Aleutians, that was a very successful trip. And at the same time, we started doing our field immobilizations here, and now we run, I think, probably one of the most successful sea lion disentanglement programs anywhere right here. And we've taken our show on the road, and folks in Alaska use our protocol. Folks back in California obviously use our protocol. Mexico, Oregon, Washington, Australia, South Africa. It's pretty cool. And so yeah, I think that's probably one of my projects that I'm most proud of, and that all coming together. And that was researchers and numerous institutions and a bunch of different veterinarians and a lot of work by everybody. But now, as I think when we were out Monday, we were out disentangling a sea lion here in BC with our Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and it worked just great again. And so it's been quite a few animals. We go out a few times every year. There's a lot of animals around here that are in need, and that's really, really cool to be part of that. I think that's one of the coolest things I do.
That's really awesome. And it's cool that there was like a kind of, because I'm happy you walked all the way through the history of it. There was kind of like a switch in.
A long story. Sorry about that.
No, I'm really glad you took the time to go through it all. It's really cool. There was like a shift in perspective that at first they thought like, we need to hit the animal with like, obviously not enough where it's like detrimental to the animal, but enough where it like is basically like stunned and stopped right away. So we can't go in the water. We can get it right away.
Don't go in the
Then,
water.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But then like it was figured out like, oh no, we can go lower than that, like enough where it will be fine in the water if it drops in the water, but we can still get it. Like it'll just like slow it down enough for us to get to it and help it. That's really cool.
I remember that moment incredibly vividly. It was just the most dynamic kind of twist in emotions you can ever imagine.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, I bet that was
low to the highest high, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's great, and we certainly do. That was a wonderful thing. But yeah, it's a different set of drugs for sure that we've used now, and yeah, it was cool. Very cool.
Is it getting better and better? Like, so is there I guess are we getting better and better at figuring out like dosage and things, like figuring out has the compound at all changed? I guess is there still improvement in it too? That's research being done.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're always tweaking the dosages a little bit. Quite honestly, our therapeutic index or kind of the margin of, from where the drugs are efficacious to when they're detrimental is huge in this particular combination of drugs. It's very, very safe.
Mm-hmm.
The negative is that it takes a long time to affect. So we do have some animals that do get away from us.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're working, I would say over half of our animals in the water is where we disentangle on just because we're comfortable. So we've developed more techniques and more technology and a little bit more work and tweaking has been on the, how do we approach an animal? Where do we dart the animal? What do we do with the animal afterwards? Coordinating several boats to look for an animal. And then most recently in the last year, which is so cool, it's unbelievable, is using drones to follow an animal. So once we approach and dart an animal, we have a drone in the air that then hovers above the animal, can see underwater, can see the animal swimming, and that has dramatically improved our ability to relocate an animal after we dart it. So that part's amazing.
That's super cool. That's something we're definitely going to touch on later. I'm pretty sure I sent you the kind of just what the reasons we made the podcast and what it's more or less about, but like robotics and kind of like the future of the ways that can help in the oceans is a huge part of what we're interested in and want to like inspire other people to make more and like on entrepreneurship in that area. So I'm super excited to touch back on that.
Yeah.
But just back on this topic though, it's super cool. Yeah, I guess it's right that after you guys figured out how to anesthetize animals in that way, most of the developments after that would be, all right, now we have that. Now we're going to improve all the things after that step, like how to, like you said, more and more procedures are being done with the animal in the water. So like all the different tools and techniques to do that. That's really cool. Yeah, mine didn't go there directly.
Great. I mean, and that's very, very, very specific to that type of anesthesia and that situation. I mean, we use a whole lot of different techniques for and anesthetizing animals safely in a hospital situation or bigger surgeries and that sort of thing. But for that's very specific to field immobilization for relatively not very invasive procedures. Exactly.
Something kind of close to this topic, but it seems like the last person I was lucky enough to talk to on the podcast, her name is Amanda Kahn. She's like a deep sea marine ecologist.
Cool.
But like one thing she's amazing, just like yourself. But one thing we touched on is it's so cool. It really seems like kind of like the community that like around the oceans, like people like doing any kind of work like yourselves in the oceans is such a close knit, like there's a different sense about it. There's like we were talking about, like it's kind of people with like that need for like exploration, that like drive for it. There's like a different feeling about those people, or like that community that are like driven to the oceans and to help the oceans and to explore the oceans, to understand them and the things in them. I don't know. We were just really talking about the way that community is. I don't know if you could speak to that at all, or if this is bringing up any thoughts, but it's just such an amazing group. Like there's a certain kind of drive in there. Because kind of like the origins of life, the amount of things we still haven't discovered, the kind of call to adventure in it. I don't know if these are things you've probably felt at least some of those things your whole life. But if you want to go into any of that, if you've had any
Yeah, I
thoughts
mean,
on
I think I could do many hours on that sort of thing, but
that.
um, you're in high school, primary school, and you have this kind of drive, and you realize kind of quickly that um, you have made a decision on who you're going to be. And I mean, I went through the dinosaur, everyone goes through the dinosaur
Mm,
stage, the astronaut stage, and a lot of people go through the veterinarian, dolphin stage. So I just say, I never grew out of that, right? Like I'm still
yeah.
that. So, but you see it, and you see how folks make their decisions and who they're going to be and how they are as they grow up. And I was super lucky. I had a great group of friends in high school that I'm still in touch with. But um, what was incredible was after I had kind of started going, down this road, and certainly, even in vet school,
Hmm.
I had an awesome vet class and super great friends. But I knew I was just a wee bit different than them as well as far as my priorities and what I was interested in, and yeah, not to detract from what they do, and maybe they're actually a little more healthy. I think there was like a better balance for a lot of those folks between social life and family life
Hmm.
and their profession. Whereas folks that kind of do what I do start to identify themselves by what they do.
Hmm.
That if I didn't do what I did, I think I'd be really depressed at this stage of
Hmm.
life, right? But what was really, really amazing to me was when I was first introduced to other people that were doing very similar things like me. So my first um, we have a conference every year called the International Association for Aquatic Animal Medicine, IAAM, and I've been going to that conference since 1995. Um, and when I first got there, like you just go, everybody's like me, right? And although I see most of these people maybe once a year or less, those are my best friends. And it's bizarro, right? Like, and these are people that are coming from all over the world, all shapes and sizes, vast majority of women. Um, there's people from all over that look at in all sorts of different ways, but they're all the same, right? Like they've all got this drive, and there's yeah, I mean, you philosophize about that all you want, um, but it's cool, right? Like you just
Oh,
sit
it's
and you
incredible. There's
chat,
like a certain spark there. Like it's,
right?
I don't
Yeah,
know what it is, but we were, yeah, that's what, like something we were trying to talk about too. Like we couldn't like pin it down either and describe it probably well enough. But there's something there that's like, yeah, just something like deep down, just because of
now,
what the oceans are to humanity, and
right.
like, yeah, we'll never, yeah, we can philosophize about it in so many ways, but it's just a pull that you when you meet other people that have it, it's wild, and like
It
it's
was cool, and I feel like it's not just the ocean, not to detract from
no,
the
yeah,
ocean
yeah,
because it's magical, but I in my heart of hearts I feel like the team at NASA is the same way, like
yeah,
um, all those guys who got this focus and this incredible interest in life beyond our planet, and the astronauts, and there's like the super jock astronaut, quintessential versus the super geeky engineer, and a whole pile of women and people from all over the place and all sorts of
yeah,
shapes and colors and the rest of it, all coming together for this goal. I love that so much. And I feel like,
exactly,
that when people are really, really good at stuff, or really driven at stuff, I think they kind of find each other. And when you can work in that synergy, that's when the magic happens. But what's funny is more and more what we're doing is we actually have these multidisciplinary teams looking at problems, which is really cool. So,
hmm,
for example, we had a sea star die-off happen here in 2013, starting, massive die-off in the wild.
hmm,
Some of our species of sea stars are now endangered because of it. And we were dealing with, certainly some veterinarians, but ecologists. We're dealing with physiologists. We're dealing with molecular people that had never touched the ocean before. Like these microbiome guys, and looking at DNA and
hmm,
massive sequencing stuff, looking for organisms, and engineers, and that was cool as well, because it was this problem that people were interested in, but coming from all these different angles, and even social scientists, right? Like, what are people doing, and how do people behave that are affecting this sort of thing? So people with relatively no like hard science or medicine background were flying in, but everyone's got this passion for it, and I think that's really cool. And I gotta say, like when especially like this year when you've got, I don't want to be political, but when you have I'm a Canadian though, so at heart, even though I'm an American as well. When you see the current political situation and sort of this polarization of the world and huge problems and coronavirus and forest fires and floods and storms and climate change and stuff, and you kind of lose hope. I mean, people are really starting to lose hope. But when you look at the people who are actually looking at these problems, like I have a whole lot of human medicine friends now, and just because we do some comparative medicine stuff, and you talk to the public health folks who've got their crazy geeky modeling and all this stuff going on, and they're so passionate about it, and they're going to save us. I know they are.
Yeah, exactly. When you stop thinking about just the people talking about it and trying to talk about funding it, if you look at the people actually trying to solve the problems,
yeah,
there'd
awesome.
be a lot more hope. Yeah, I think there'd be a lot more hope out there, which is definitely very important for this year.
Yeah, without a doubt, there's always hope, and I think that's people need to not forget that.
Mm-hmm. That's very much my view as well. But yeah, that's probably the most like interesting aspect to me. The thing you said a little bit ago is especially the fact that we can do it more and more each progressing year because of like technology and everything. But that synergistic effect, the fact that all these passionate people across all these disciplines that want to solve these same problems there's more ways for us to do so and like kind of cross pollinate between all that and do things.
Without a doubt.
It's amazing. But yeah. I guess now onto a very important big subject that'll be a little bit sadder, but that's why it's important to touch on. There's probably a few people, or a few professions and people better than you to touch on kind of how, I guess, bad things really are getting for ocean animals and like in the oceans now, or just like the progress of everything, the current state, where things are going. But I have a few just like points written down we can go through, but are there certain marine animal groups that are hit the worst?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of the animals that are hit the worst are animals that you probably wouldn't think of, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are the base organisms that life depends on. So when you talk about ocean acidification or climate change, you are affecting primary trophic levels, primary production. People don't think about those organisms or how they're changing, but those affect everything else. And we probably don't have time to delve in that. I think where my kind of passion has always been is with the marine mammals, for better or for worse. Although I have deep respect for everything else, and of course we look at everything from a very holistic point of view these days. But the populations that are in most trouble from a conservation perspective are small whales and dolphins. So things like the vaquita in the Gulf of Mexico, things like Indo-Pacific humpback dolphin in Asia, the river dolphins, whether it's Yangtze River dolphin or the Amazon River dolphins, and the list of small dolphins and porpoises are disappearing is growing. We've lost 2 species at least during my lifetime of small dolphin. We'll likely lose vaquita. That population's down to certainly less than 20, maybe less than 50 individuals right now. And if we want to save those animals, it's very much a major shift in how we do things, and it may be too late. And I can't believe that. I feel like if people really wanted to do something, they could. But it's going to take a lot of out of the box thinking. We have our own population of killer whales here. The southern resident killer whales are down to about 74, 75 individuals. Probably should be closer to about 300 individuals. In general, they're in decline. And what do all these things have in common? Well, it's usually us, right? It's usually people and our activities, whether it's damming rivers, whether it's changing river flows, whether it's overfishing and taking away a food supply, whether it's and in the case of the vaquita, it's an illegal fishery for totoaba, which is almost a cartel-driven industry, which is so illegal. But the swim bladders are worth a fortune in the Asian market, so they're smuggled. They're often smuggled through the U.S. So the U.S. definitely has responsibility there. And the porpoises are just caught in the gill nets that are used illegally to catch these fish. And the fish themselves are, of course, very endangered as well. So let's not lose sight of that. But so it's us, and how we use our environment and how we exploit things. You can talk about shark finning, and you can talk about just general overfishing, pollution, lost gear, drift nets that are lost, just poor responsibility for the way we do things. And it's us. It's a greed. It's an irresponsibility. I think a lot of it's a complex problem. A lot of these things are driven by folks who have no alternative, right? Like, there's no other source of income. There's no way to break out of extreme poverty. There's no other way to feed your family than to do something illegal. That's not their fault, but it's where they're at. To change those things takes huge like shifts in how we do things and who we are and how we respect people and you just can't go up to someone who's been doing something their whole life and say, no, you can't do that, now it's bad. You have to sort of present an alternative and a way to survive. And it's not like you have to leave here and move to another, relocate people and say, you can't do that as well, right? So it's not just veterinarians and scientists, and you're looking at social scientists and policymakers and groups of people coming together for the greater good, not just for their own personal gain, and that's very difficult sometimes.
No, it's definitely a very complex issue that, like, there's other huge complex issues that you can kind of solve with, let's say, like, maybe the simpler side of funneling money into it and creating something. But this is even harder because, like you said, it's probably even more just about like regulation, or I guess even more than that, like you said, giving people an alternative, because it's not like one country doing something, it's like the world, and people need an alternative of like a way to survive, things to do, to know what it's really doing. It's a huge complex thing that I hope we get better and better at solving or helping each year. Do you know, in terms of just like overall, like, I don't know if there's like metrics for just overall metrics, but is like the rate of like damage increasing, decreasing? Like, are we slowing ourselves down at the harm we're doing? Is it still kind of escalating? Like, if there was like a chart, do you like, is there?
I think I think some of the basic numbers that we look at, and again, I'm a veterinarian. I'm not an ecologist, and I'm not a climatologist, but some of the things to look at are the rate of species extinction, right? Just the extinction rate is increasing, right? It's probably certainly more than in any human memory, or and as long as humans have been here, I think our extinction rate is much higher, increasing. I think that folks can argue that a little bit, that some of that's natural, and certainly, that is true, as species come and go for sure over long periods of time. But I think that rate of extinction is not normal, and I think when you look at who's disappearing and where and why, unfortunately, humans come out as kind of the culprits, or at least helping things speed along in many instances. And we are strange on how we've decided that we use this planet that's been given to us, right? And how much
that's personally excuse I hate is it's natural, is because one, in a totally separate domain of using that kind of way of thinking, I know there's someone I respect that I was listening to, and they were talking about things like, like the simulation, if we're in a simulation, or like AI and stuff like that. And they were saying, well, like, anything that you could possibly do is natural, because it has to abide by the laws of physics. So anything that could happen is technically natural. But like, that doesn't mean, and like, back to what this is just the fact that species die out, and that's a thing that happens, doesn't mean it's okay for us to kind of just bulldoze over everything. Like, just like,
absolutely, right.
And the world that was given to us as just another species to not care about any of the other ones.
Right. And I mean, I think it's important to realize that, we are one of the species that lives here, and it's normal. It is normal for us to be here. And, what we do does shape the world around us a little bit, like every species and stuff. But we may have gone a little overboard.
Yeah.
There may perhaps be more of us than there should have been. I'm just throwing it out there.
Slight change of topic, but still in this domain. In the area of kind of trash and waste, what's that situation like through your eyes? And it's like progression, its course.
Yeah, I think there's two things going on there. I think this is where we get into a little bit of geopolitics as well. But certainly that sort of where I see it, where it's most visual for me, is the disentanglement story, bringing us back to the sea lions and all the garbage that they get themselves wrapped up to, and that eventually will cause their death in a really slow, nasty way, which is, where we do things. But that's going to help that individual for sure. And when we document the garbage and stuff and figure out where it's coming from, that might have wider impacts for sure. But I feel like, here in Vancouver and Seattle, we're a pretty wealthy, well-educated, outdoorsy population, and we can change things, and we do, right? Like, every kid is angry that someone throws garbage out the window. I remember highways just littered with stuff, and it was just normal to throw your McDonald's out the window when you're done with it, right? In the 70s. And that's changed, right? Like that, for most of our populations in North America and Europe and large parts of Asia, you just don't do that. And you can see things getting cleaner and cleaner for sure. But I think where we kind of lose it is when we don't see it. So things like microplastics, legacy chemicals, when we do our laundry and we use a bunch of little plastic fibers in our clothes, and those fibers go through our sewage system, and then they clog up filter feeders, and there you can find microplastics in the intestinal tract of beluga whales in the Arctic, right? Like they make themselves everywhere. So what's the big effect of that stuff? We can't see it, but it certainly has an effect. And then further down are legacy contaminants, our organochlorines or PCBs or heavy metals that come from all sorts of industries that we use and activities that we do, our fossil fuel use, things that we can't see. So I think those things are getting worse. We're good at reacting to things we can see with our eyes, like plastic garbage, and we like to clean up our shorelines. Some of that is we live, quite a luxurious lifestyle where we have the opportunity to have good education and instill good stewardship in our kids, and I'm very proud of that, and it's cool for the community to go out and clean the beach and stuff. A lot of people around the world do not have that luxury, that they're living in situations where they can't dispose of their garbage in a good way. They just can't. And so, or they're in countries that for one reason or another, for economics, actually accept the garbage of other countries, to get paid, and that's crazy too, right? So we're like out of sight, out of mind, but someone else is doing it.
Yeah.
So I think that's where poverty is a big issue. I think if there was no poverty, if there was education, then we'd have no problems, right? Because then why would everyone not get along?
Sure. Yeah.
We all know better, and we have enough to survive in a happy way. Why would we compete and be nasty to each other? So I think that those basic things are at the root of a lot of problems.
So now, after bringing up, I guess, all those different problems, which one do you feel the most, I guess, well versed in, or that you personally just have the most experience with, whether it's or just experience, even coming into contact with it, with either the trash coming in, or fisheries, or even climate change. Which one do you feel the most knowledgeable on, well versed on, experienced with?
Yeah, and again, I just stress that I'm not not an ecologist.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah.
So where my experience comes in is treating individual animals or looking at
Mhm.
ways that populations can be helped.
Even just the one you think about the most often.
Well, I mean, the one that's most visual to me is the plastic garbage thing. A lot of that actually stems from fisheries interactions. I think
Mhm.
a lot of what we deal with is discarded fishing gear. Even the plastic packing straps are likely from bait boxes. So human animal interaction and fisheries are a big deal. We have quite a few animals that are shot. They are brought into our facility. Quite a few animals have been hit by boats, entangled in different things. So what I guess the thing that I know most about is the effects of human activity on
Mhm.
marine mammals.
Mhm. So given that, if you would be willing to play with a little thought exercise with me.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I didn't know it was
Um, no,
wasting
you're
everybody's
totally
time.
fine. Yeah, you're totally
Sorry.
fine. Yeah, this now we're entering the fun part where we can just broad questions, philosophical things, and just
Uh-huh.
brainstorming. Um, if you, and I don't know if you probably played around this idea at least once or twice, but if you, Marty, were given, let's say, $1 billion or just an endless fund, where do you think you would start uh, to combat that problem? And feel free to.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think if you want real solutions, it has to be a multi-pronged approach, and you actually have to change the way people feel and think and their priorities.
Yeah, because it seems like in these cases it'd be like a big part of it would be like an education problem, like you brought up.
Yeah, I think
But, yeah.
certainly. I, if you want to do something overnight, I feel like creating more protected areas
Mhm.
has immediate impact. I think a lot of our problems stem from expansion of us and our activities and not enough protection for wild places.
What's the
Um,
current state of that? Like, it's something I definitely don't know about, and I wish I did, and I bet a lot
mhm.
of people don't know about. Like there's probably more regulation in like water surrounding countries, but in terms of like the open water, like the open oceans, like I don't know how any like are there big known like regulated areas, or there like
No,
I don't understand how any,
no,
the regulation goes there.
no, and I don't know the ins and outs of international
Mhm.
law like that either. Certainly, there's a certain kilometer limit or mile limit off the shore that's the jurisdiction of each country and can be
Mhm.
protected in a certain way. I suppose for me, the way we've chosen to conserve areas using the terrestrial model is we create these parks, right? The national park system, for example, but they become these weird islands, and a lot of our species, of course, need to move. A lot of our upper level predators need to, have huge territories and
Yeah.
move. And so you get this concept of these um, passageways or alleyways between the parks that people are trying to develop. And I think that's very important and can be transferred right to the marine environment. So what we've created in the marine environment are these protected areas. So maybe an island in amongst a bunch of other islands that are protected. You can't fish off that island, for example, or you can't motorboat. But I think what has to happen is you actually have to have these areas where those things are connected somehow and protect those connections as well.
Mhm.
Maybe not to the same extent, but you have to allow for expansion of species, movement of
Mhm.
species. You can't treat an island like just an island, I suppose.
Exactly.
So,
That's a
so
big
if I had
difference.
$1 billion, I'd
Yeah.
start trying to connect some of these things and protect areas that maybe people wouldn't normally protect.
Mhm.
And yeah, I get these you know pathways that animals can be safe. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, it's really interesting to think about. Because yeah, it's so different from like any land mammal or any land animal, just because marine animals need to migrate. Like so many of them migrate and need that space.
Right.
You can't just like, oh, this little zone we're gonna protect. Like, no, you need to like they're gonna need to move around. Like there's no way to do that. It's still want to be effective. That's interesting to think about. But yeah, hopefully we'll have more billionaires
Yeah.
joining
Right.
zones soon and trying to solve some of these problems.
But that gives you hope too, right? Like I think when people are really, really rich,
Mhm.
not all of them, of course, but certainly there's a group of them that kind of come together by themselves. No one's told them to
Yeah.
try and make a better world. I'm thinking of Bill Gates and thinking of Elon Musk and
Yeah,
thinking of
exactly.
they're all, I'm sure there's all sorts of other folks that don't, but they're good role models, right? And maybe they're not, everyone's got their focus and their interest in stuff, and again, more coordinated approach is probably the way to go. But that's really inspiring, I
Mhm.
feel, right? And those folks, yeah, I mean, that's so awesome.
Well, you kind of perfectly segued into my next like kind of topic or like set of questions. Now like to like all that technology stuff,
Hmm.
um, kind of to like the current state of it, like with all the drones, like that you mentioned before, and just like the
Yeah,
way that we use them, but also just in terms of the way you use that billion or those billions, and just in terms of technology of things that you think would be beneficial. Yeah, I guess if we want to start just for background for me and for everybody, the ways that tech is used now, like things like that, like the drones and robotics, any ways
yeah.
that's used currently.
Well, we are so, medicine and including veterinary medicine is one of those areas where you push the technology all the time. And my bosses are always on my case because I'm like, well, we're gonna have to replace the ultrasound machine. They're like, dude, you just bought that like 5 or 10 years ago, and I'm like, dude, when was that? Are you gonna? Is your cell phone 5 years old? There's
Yeah,
no way.
exactly.
So why do you
Yeah.
feel like the rest of the world isn't also changing and expanding and talking in different ways? And our well, there's different areas certainly, but the technology stuff is awesome for me. Like I've always been a Star Trek fan. I feel like
Hmm.
our hospital should look like the Starship Enterprise. And it kind of gets there. Like a lot of medicine is very visual and imaging directed. So 3D reconstructed imaging, CT scans, PET scans, MRIs, all that stuff to better isolate lesions and problems and then look at animals, how they're getting better or not. That's increasingly more available, and we use that stuff all the time. Ultrasound, X-rays, endoscopy, small board scopes. They go up little creepy
Hmm.
places and visualize things. Like that stuff is so awesome.
Hmm.
We use virtual reality to reconstruct CTs now, so we can run the sea otter through a machine and then put on our goggles and look at that sea otter in front of us. And I
So
mean, it
cool.
actually looks like
Yeah, you can like, yeah,
that Star Trek scanner, where all of a sudden the 3D reconstruction came
yeah.
up.
Or like running
It
like
looks,
Iron Man, you can like zoom in and out of like the
yeah,
parts. Like,
yeah,
yeah, that's
it's
so
crazy.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So that part is like every day. It's amazing. Then we're some of the tech is so cool for me is on the genetic side of things and the sequencing side of things. So you're probably too young to remember, but I remember vividly when the human genome was described. When they sequenced the human genome,
Mhm.
that was probably a 12 to 13-year project, and it
Yeah,
was on the cover
huge
of Time
project.
magazine around
Yeah.
2000, 2001. Well, we can sequence a human in less than 24 hours now,
Hmm.
right? Like that's crazy. 13 years to 24 hours. So I work with a group at BC Cancer, led by Stephen Jones, who's like an incredible molecular biologist. And we do things like sequence cancers compared to the host. So let's say we have a sea otter with lymphoma. So we sequence the sea otter, and actually we published the first sequence of a sea otter, which is amazing. And then we sequence this tumor and look at the differences in what genes are on, what genes are not on, and then you know how to treat that tumor better. And they do that in people. That's crazy. And then where it goes one step beyond that is this sort of science called metagenomics, where you take a sample of seawater or a breath sample from a killer whale or a fecal sample, and you sequence everything that's in there. That is crazy talk,
Yeah, that's wild. I didn't know that was a thing. Yeah.
right? And then you have this whole chart of all these different, usually to the genus level, at least sometimes to the species level, and you can see the distribution of organisms in your gastrointestinal tract.
Yeah, in that little environment or that little like,
Yeah, like every bacteria, every virus that's in there, you see this
yeah,
whole distribution of
that's
fungus.
wild. I didn't know they could do that. Like,
It's crazy.
yeah.
And then and this has effects on Mars exploration and stuff, where we're looking at water quality and healthy water and the distribution of organisms in healthy water and recycling water in aquarium systems versus what people might have to do, for years and years when they're in Mars and stuff. So it has all these weird, joint functions and studies and stuff. But that distribution of organisms and how that changed, like for example, if you're a human and you're taking an antibiotic, that distribution in your gastrointestinal tract changes. You may have some weird distribution like this, and it changes. And like looking at that, and then it's crazy. Like I love that stuff.
That's super wild.
We can take a breath sample using a drone from a free-ranging killer whale, and then look at the metagenomics, so sequence all the organisms in that breath sample and let you know whether it's normal, whether the animal has pneumonia, what's causing the pneumonia. It's nutty.
That's wild. Yeah, this is it's random. This came up also when I was talking to Amanda in the last podcast, but there's this one person that I recommended. There's a separate podcast that I had listened to with this researcher named Manolis Kellis. He's a genomics researcher that does, he basically is like equally skilled in like genomics and like that side of biology and like computer science. So he does like really cool, basically cross species analytics of like genomics. So you can kind of see the ways different animal species have like developed over time and track like specific genes in them.
Yeah, we sequence, so wild. Yeah, it's awesome. So we sequenced the beluga whale, and then a whole other group of researchers sequenced narwhal, which are relatively closely related whales, and they isolated the genes that are responsible for the tooth to grow into a tusk. I mean, that's awesome, right?
Yeah, it's insane. It's insane. But hearing that guy talk about it, like you would. I'm gonna definitely make sure to give you that podcast link after because it's so interesting. But that's so wild. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up like that side of newer technologies, like the genomics and like just our understanding on that level. So you mentioned we already currently use like kind of a drone to get some of those samples.
Yeah, folks in the U.S. and also in Canada do drone following whales. There's a group here in Vancouver that was looking at incorporating AI into how the drone drives. So removing the human operator.
I'm very interested.
One step further and using the pattern on the backs of killer whales. So AI could identify individual killer whales. So let's say, that J37 name of the killer whale has been losing weight based on some other types of drone work, because we take these specific aerial photographs and we can see animals shrinking or being pregnant or whatever. And then you have a fleet of drones. This is now science fiction a little bit, but then you have a fleet
this is where I'm all in. Trust me, I'm talking people's ears off about this all day. This is I think just like you in terms of I think it's really important to have people like Elon Musk or even just like anybody thinking about things and we can have that future that is sci-fi right now, but like someone needs to be building it. Like it needs to be built. So like one thing I'm super just interested in is there seems to be so much opportunity for like aquatic drones. So integrating AI to that. There's so many things that drones can do safely in the water. And we can automate those things, and then those can way later on. The water is like a base step to space, kind of like there's so much cross pollination between. I also didn't know until this last podcast with Amanda that NASA has like a marine exploration side. I never knew they had like an ocean exploration side too. Right. But yeah, anyway, continue. But yeah, like the ocean drone thing.
No, so the dream is a fleet of drones that are just waiting for these whales to come back. They know exactly which individual is sick, and the AI drives it in, takes a breath sample, or if the animal defecates, takes a poop sample, brings it back. And now we've got sequencing capability that can attach to your Mac laptop. So there's these micro sequencers you just plug into your USB port.
That's wild. I didn't know
drop
that.
A sequence in, and it starts sequencing organisms, right? So
that's so cool.
So you can do that on a boat, right? It's nutty. It's
really I know what I want for Christmas now. How much are those?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This might be a super specific weird question, but I think it's cool to think about. Again, back to if we were in the future going to have automated drones that are going through the oceans, deep oceans. One of the questions I thought about just to myself was the way automated cars work and everything, they're obviously mostly working on visual data. There's like some like radar and stuff, but it's mostly visual and like processing all that. Would, just because you know so much about marine animals, do you think that would even be the best way, like if, for a drone to sense its environment? Would other ways be better, like through like sonar, or like, I guess, what are just the, yeah, I found myself thinking about the different like ways that marine animals, like their locomotion systems, kind of like their ways of movement and their ways of like sensing, because I feel like it may not be the case that cameras are the best way for drones to work underwater.
No, I think a lot of it would be, for immediate obstacles and stuff, it's sort of sonar sensor based, some visual for
Or like
sure.
electrical like pulses, but yeah, like I would love to hear it.
Mhm.
Obviously, again, this is gonna be, this will be all just like off your intuition. I know this isn't your specialty, but I would love to hear your thoughts.
Well,
Uh,
I mean, the way a lot of our species, not necessarily marine mammals, but a lot of you kind of use what's already been established, which is how other species navigate, sharks, etc. So, water temperature, water salinity, and microsalinity changes as you move up and down in depth. Water pressure, right? So you're maintaining at a certain depth.
mhm,
Um, those are and some geomagnetic forces as well. Those are how animals navigate that don't ever come to the surface, right?
mhm,
Um, so you have to current strength, prevailing currents. You take advantage of those things and put those into the algorithm for your navigation if you don't need to
mhm.
come to the surface, right? If you're at the surface, then obviously, celestial bodies, just age-old thing. And of course, we have a whole GPS system, so that kind of is a cheat. But
Mhm.
if you're at the surface, you can GPS anything, right? But
Yeah,
it's underwater that things become a little bit more tricky for sure.
and interesting. Yeah.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's a super cool. It's such an awesome thing to think about that I think is really important. Um, yeah, it's so wild. There's so many aspects of it. And it's so cool, like with technology, assuming no like huge global calamity, that I think there's no way we don't get there. So someone should be making it. Um, but yeah, it's so cool that with technology there can be so many different we can like essentially tag on the sensors that like across the board of animals. You can add all those different ways that they're sensing their environment, and just kind of like the way that AI and like machine learning works, it'll eventually learn to read that data better the more you give it, and like learn
Right.
to move around. It'll just have like, we have five senses, it can have like 20, you
Hmm.
know which will be super cool that that's something we can, yeah, eventually build. And there's just so much, yeah, to me even cooler than that is just the amount of things that it can help out with in the ocean, like whether it's like waste pickup, tracking these animals, um, tracking any of those levels in the oceans, like surveying for like minerals and materials we can use. Like, there's endless things that could
Yeah.
be done if we like. There's so much of the ocean's unexplored too, which is wild to me. That only like 5% or sort of the deep ocean has been explored. That's insane.
Yeah. And well, deep ocean exploration is advancing very steeply, like with side scan sonars and deep sonars and the
Mhm.
ROVs and the rest of it. So
Yeah, I didn't know about
things
the
are moving.
rovers until like last week. There's a benthic rover, like the Mars rover, that's just on the.
Right.
That's so cool.
Right. Yeah. Things are being explored very quickly, which is very cool.
hmm I know we're running out of time,
Oh,
so
no
I'm
worries.
just going to ask a couple more questions. And I would, yeah, I already know I would love to talk to you again if you ever have time again.
Sure. Absolutely.
Um, but for, yeah, well, what just to you, and it can already be, we might have already touched on some of them, but what to you, other than your like direct team and institute and work, gives you the most hope for the future of the oceans?
My kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're really cool kids, and my daughter is 16, and she wants to be a veterinarian, and they both of them care so much about animals. We're lucky; we've got a couple of acres out here in a fairly rural area, so we've got
Mhm.
horses and ducks and a dog and fish everywhere, and lizards and the rest of it. And I see that same sort of care in them that I sort of saw in you when I was little, and they just really don't want anything to be hurt. They're careful. My daughter especially is turning into quite the militant. environmentalist. You know, she wants
Yeah.
us to go vegetarian. She wants us to be zero waste, and she's good. Like she's like doing this thing. And then we had another veterinarian come and look at our horses for their vaccines and general health stuff, which is funny. Everyone makes fun of me. Are you a veterinarian? I said, yeah, but I mean, I don't care, you know, I don't have the dental equipment. I've never done it. So we get
Yeah.
my friend who's been doing this for 30 years and he makes it look easy. Anyway, he goes, he's spending some time there and he was asking about my daughter. And I said, oh, you know, she's thinking about being a veterinarian. And he goes, well, come here, Sophie, let's take some blood on your horses. And there she is. Like, there's this other guy teaching her, and I'm just standing back and listening. And there she's giving the vaccines and taking blood from my horses. And I was like, wow, there it is. And she's so excited about it. I went, oh,
So
there
cool.
it is. Boom, we're done. And so, and my son's the same way. He's a little bit more on the video kind of computer geeky side, but he's so interested in making the world a better place and caring about stuff. And I think that's a lot of kids. And so that gives me the biggest hope is our young people and kids. Like, they're so good and their hearts are coming from the right place. And you know, maybe reality is going to set in an ugly way someday, but right now it's all very pure and everything is for the good. It's awesome.
That's so awesome. Yeah, and I love that they both are into it in different ways. It seems like she's following a little more in like your footsteps, and he can help build those awesome drones we're talking about.
That's right. What
Yeah,
a team.
yeah, exactly. What a power team. Yeah.
Problem is they hate each other because they're brother and sister, but well, hopefully they'll get along later.
Oh, I feel that. I bet they will. I have only one sister. She's 8 years younger, and we hugely because of that age gap. Like obviously weren't close for like a long time, but now she's my favorite person in the world. Like we're best friends. I love her.
Cool.
But I'm sure they will be much the same, especially with
I
their.
haven't seen it so far. But
Oh, it took years. Yeah, it took years for us too, but especially with their common goal, that could be cool. Are there any books, documentaries? It's cool that we just touched on your kids too, because there'll probably be like things you'll recommend to them in time. But
Yeah.
about any of these things, or just books, especially that got you really motivated, like
So
they really stuck in
everything's
your memory.
everything's age specific, but of course I grew up in the age of the Jacques Cousteau TV shows and movies, and that was a huge inspiration to me. You know, he may in hindsight he may not have been the greatest scientist, and actually if you listen to him, he never really professes to be a scientist, but he sure liked exploring and testing new stuff and interacting with his environment in as possible, you know, positive way as possible. And those scenes are, you know, so inspirational. And of course, Wild Kingdom, all these old documentaries.
Yeah.
I mean, our documentary filmmaking is next level these days, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're doing a little TV show about our work right now, and you know, just the 4K cameras and the images they take, and then you look at the David Attenborough series and you know, Life on Earth and Blue Planet and all that stuff. It's so good, and hopefully, if people just get a snippet of that and go, oh yeah, we need to protect this stuff. It's really important.
Yeah, exactly. The more content out there, the better. It's amazing. It's good to expose people to. Are there any books out there that and they can be technical books, they can be philosophical books, they can be about the oceans in general, they can be about specific marine animals or specific like adventurers even, but any that stick out to you?
You know, I think Douglas Adams, you know, the guy who wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I think that stuff's very inspirational.
Yeah.
Definitely went on some environmental soul searching later in life, and that was very, very cool.
So is there a particular, I've only read, I read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but I haven't read any of his other ones. Is there like a particular title you have in mind, or
I just look him up. There's a few
where he goes more into the environment?
Yeah.
Cool.
David Quayman is an old author for Outside Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
He has a number of different kind of really cool looks at the world around us. I think he's always been a favorite.
You said David Quayman?
Yeah, Quammen.
Gotcha.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff out there for sure. Yeah, but we're such a visual world right now, and it's hard to compete with you know, the access to documentaries and stuff. So yeah, explore your Netflix account or your Disney account. And
I bet there's a lot on there worth watching. Yeah. All right, now last one. In what ways would you recommend, like in what ways can people help in any of these areas? Like what if people want to make a difference here, want to help, we can even, I guess we just touched on learn more, but what can
Hmm.
people do?
I think what I try and get people to do, or what I hope people will do more and more of, is just think about what they do every day, um, without thinking right now. Just think about what you're doing, the food you're eating, the way you're disposing of your garbage, the way you're getting to work, and try and kind of work through the repercussions of what you're doing. You know, where's your food coming from? Where are your clothes coming from? How are they made? What are the lasting impacts of how we do? Also, I'm really about human and animal interaction in a positive way, and so, when you're simple stuff, but we definitely have a garden and animals and stuff. But think about a wildlife corridor. If you've got a big plot of land, think about a wildlife corridor so that our animals can move through your property without being a nuisance to you and to themselves. Think about
That's cool.
a
I never thought of
butterfly
wildlife
garden.
corridor. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got just a couple of acres, but we've got this, big wide corridor on the back where we've got, just trying to restore it to be as native as possible and pulling out all the invasive species and making sure there's, a cool corridor and leave the logs that are falling down because those are important habitat. And don't, if you've got native wildlife that's on your property, and don't think of everything as a nuisance. Think about how you can coexist, and I think coexisting is a big one for me. Think about that word and how we can have less impact, and how we can ruin, not ruin the lives of those species that we interact with on a daily basis. So yeah, things like that I think are important.
Yeah, well, I think, yeah, and that's awesome. And that's a probably beautiful note for us to end on. Um, yeah, I had an amazing time talking to you. I hope we can talk again in the future.
Absolutely, this was a lot of fun for me. I
Yeah,
really
this was
appreciate
super
it.
fun. Yeah, super fun. And yeah, I think just awesome discussions like this, and yeah, and people like you and everything like this just gives me way more hope for the future too. And hopefully gets other people much more excited about it. Yeah, because there's a lot we
Well,
can
the
do.
younger folks are the ones that are going to change everything, and there's a great group of people coming right up.